It was a Tuesday mid-afternoon, a rare, serene moment drenched in the scent of chlorine and lazy summer bliss. I, Agent Darius Monroe, alias Daniel Knox, had finally managed to slip away from my usual clandestine operations into a well-deserved break from my latest covert assignment involving a surprisingly profitable feline pampering ring. My standard tactical ensemble and protective vest had been swapped out for a pair of tropical swim shorts and a jaunty straw fedora. I found myself drifting on a cheerful pink flamingo pool float in the glistening waters of Golden Meadows, a residential community designed for laid-back luxury and suburban charm. The gentle sway of the float and the playful ripples on the water's surface offered a welcome respite from the pressures of undercover life. I relaxed, letting my mind wander as I contemplated the strange duality of my existence, one moment immersed in high-stakes espionage and the next, enjoying an idyllic escape from it all. The reflective surface of the pool, tinged with the slight murk of chlorinated water, mirrored back not a hardened secret agent but a man momentarily unburdened by the weight of his covert responsibilities. My reverie was abruptly interrupted by the sharp, piercing sound of a raised voice slicing through the tranquility. I adjusted my tinted sunglasses and peered over the curved beak of my float when I saw her. Standing authoritatively on the pool deck with her arms akimbo, her stance radiated indignation. It was none other than Karen Kensington, yes, Karen, whose reputation as the self-appointed, hypervigilant president of the HOA was well known throughout Golden Meadows. With her sensible walking shoes clacking on the tiled deck, she glared at me as though I were the embodiment of suburban anarchy. "Excuse me, you. You are in violation." Karen's voice thundered, reaching operatic heights that contrasted sharply with the calm scene around the pool. Her eyes, narrowed in disapproval, fixed on my relaxed form as if I had committed a monumental transgression against the very essence of residential decorum. I sighed inwardly, the gentle bobbing of my pink float offering an ironic counterpoint to her furious stance. "Karen, I live at 42, Pelican Place. I've been a resident here for 6 months," I began, lowering my sunglasses further in an attempt to communicate calm. I tried to remind her of past community scrimmages, like the notorious, no bagging grass clippings, debacle that had once stirred up the neighborhood. Yet, her countenance only hardened, as if my explanation were as unsatisfactory as a misfiled report. Her words reverberated around the pool deck, a relentless tirade about trespassing, property values, and the sanctity of a residence-only pool. I couldn't help but let out a quiet, ironic chuckle beneath my breath at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, an agent, temporarily unmasked and free of my covert duties. Simply trying to enjoy a leisurely afternoon on my pool float, and Karen was intent on enforcing rules that seemed as outdated as last season's fashion. In that moment, the serene mid-afternoon interlude was shattered, not by an enemy or a high-stakes mission, but by the overzealous suburban vigilance of Karen. Little did she know, this encounter would soon unravel into a day of farcical yet fierce battles over the simplest of pleasures, and I, for one, was more than ready for the challenge. The fallout from that turbulent Tuesday afternoon did not settle quickly at Golden Meadows. After my brief, unplanned encounter with Karen on the pool deck, what I had hoped would be a solitary incident soon transformed into a full-fledged neighborhood kerfuffle. As I resumed my quiet float on the inflatable flamingo, the memory of Karen's shrill denunciation still stung like salt in a wound. Yet beneath that sting brewed a deep resolve not to be bullied by petty suburban enforcers. In the days that followed, subtle irritations began creeping into my daily life. At first, it was the occasional stray memo, handwritten notes posted on my front door, admonishing me for failing to abide by residency etiquette. Each note accused me of disturbing the sacred serenity of Golden Meadows, a phrase I'd soon learn was Karen's personal mantra. I recalled the fiasco of the no bagging grass clippings debacle, another reminder that Karen ruled this community with a stringent, if not arbitrary, set of rules. Soon, the irritation became more alarming when neighbors began whispering about unauthorized pool users and unruly visitors. I'd catch furtive glances from other residents who seemed torn between admiration for my laid-back approach and anxiety over potential HOA repercussions. But despite the murmurs, I continued to enjoy my afternoon breaks, paddling lazily on my flamingo float, letting the chlorine-scented water momentarily wash away the day's trials. One sunny afternoon, as I lounged near the pristine pool, Karen's presence reared up like an unwelcome specter. She appeared at the edge of the deck, eyes blazing with indignation and lips pursed in disapproval. "You know, Mr. Monroe, your antics are disrupting the order of this community," she proclaimed, her voice oscillating between anger and self-righteous superiority. I maintained my casual composure, sunglasses firmly in place, and reminded her that I was a resident of 42, Pelican Place. "I've been here for 6 months, Karen. We've discussed things like proper yard waste disposal before," I said evenly. Karen's response was icy and uncompromising. "That does not excuse trespassing on our exclusive pool area," she screeched as if my very presence were an act of war against suburban tranquility. Her words, laced with an absurd concern over property values and community decorum, reverberated not just across the pool deck but throughout Golden Meadows. I could sense that Karen's tirade was only the beginning. Over the next few days, her actions became increasingly disruptive. Her phone buzzed at odd hours with new complaints, and I began to notice a pattern. The more I attempted to enjoy my brief reprieve, the more Karen mobilized her network of enforcers. My mailbox soon held not only further accusatory memos but also warnings issued by the HOA's own office, letters steeped in bureaucratic language and citing obscure community guidelines. Frustration simmered inside me. I realized that Karen's crusade against me was not simply about pool etiquette or the proper disposal of yard clippings, it was a manifestation of her desire to control, to police every corner of Golden Meadows according to her own draconian standards. Each rule she enforced, each complaint she filed, was another attempt to assert her dominance over our shared space. Though I maintained a cool and sardonic demeanor in public, behind my carefully practiced smiles there was a growing determination to stand up to this overzealous guardian of suburban order. I began to document every incident meticulously, taking photos of the memos posted on my door, recording the exact times of her public outbursts, and noting the names of the residents who whispered their support or disapproval. What had begun as a personal dispute was quickly evolving into a matter of principle, one that questioned the very right of a resident to enjoy his own property without undue harassment. By the end of that hectic week, it was clear that Golden Meadows was polarized. Some residents quietly sided with me, tired of the rigid order imposed by Karen, while others trembled at the idea of defying an established authority. I realized that I would soon be forced to make a choice, either retreat into silence or mobilize and assert my rights. That pivotal decision, I knew, would shape not only my own future but also the spirit of our entire community. In the midst of the rising storm, I resolved to fight back, not through overt conflict, but by gathering evidence and preparing to challenge the oppressive regime that had taken root at Golden Meadows. My quiet afternoons on the pool float would no longer be moments of solitary repose but the beginning of a battle for dignity and personal freedom. Just as I had begun to plan my strategy in quiet determination, the absurdity of the suburban siege escalated in the most unexpected way. I was once again in the pool at Golden Meadows, enjoying a particularly languid afternoon, when the monotony was shattered by a clatter that promised further complications. Out of nowhere, a golf cart rattled up the pool deck. In its driver's seat, a man in a somewhat ill-fitting uniform stepped out, a uniform emblazoned not with a law enforcement insignia but the puzzled emblem of HOA security. The man introduced himself, his name clearly plastered on a flimsy badge as Officer Henderson. His manner was at once confused and overly earnest, as though he believed himself to be on the front lines of an epic suburban battle. "I'm here to investigate a report of trespassing," he announced, his voice wavering like that of a reluctant guardian. I, still afloat on my beloved flamingo float, couldn't help but let a wry smile tug at the corners of my mouth. "Trespassing? I live at 42, Pelican Place, as I just mentioned," I reiterated, attempting to inject a note of humor into the surreal scene. Officer Henderson's eyes darted to the clipboard he clutched like a lifeline. He frowned, scanning through the neatly printed directory of residents maintained by the HOA. "I don't see a Daniel Knox listed," he mumbled, blinking in apparent disbelief. "Karen, ever the conductor of this suburban orchestra, stormed back onto the deck. "That's right," she declared, her tone a mixture of triumph and indignation. "You're not on our list, and that means you're a trespasser in our exclusive community." The absurdity of being denied residency on paper in your own neighborhood seemed a cruel twist of bureaucratic fate. I calmly produced my driver's license, letting it dangle from my hand as I gave Officer Henderson a practiced, almost theatrical, sigh. "My name is Daniel Knox, and I've been a resident here for half a year," I said, extending the license with an air of finality. Officer Henderson peered at the document with a distracted squint, then at me, his expression clouded with uncertainty. After a tense moment that felt suspended in time, he murmured, "It appears everything is in order." Karen, meanwhile, was not so easily mollified. She erupted yet again, accusing me of all manner of wrongdoings, from secret plot conspiracies involving pool floats to insinuations that I was using my pool for unsavory activities. "This neighborhood is for established families," she thundered, her voice carrying an almost operatic shrillness. "I demand that you be removed immediately from the premises." The situation teetered on the edge of comedy and tragedy. Officer Henderson, whose initial bravado had evaporated under the weight of Karen's relentless tirade, stammered something about protocol and careful verification. I maintained my composure, my tone layered with dry amusement as I addressed the absurd charges. "I assure you, officer, I'm hardly plotting a poolside coup. I'm merely trying to enjoy an afternoon of aquatic relaxation," I replied smoothly, drawing a few snickers from nearby onlookers. Karen's eyes blazed as she bellowed, "You imposter, you're clearly here with nefarious intentions. I've seen stranger things, but nothing as scandalous as a resident who mocks our standards." Her words were punctuated by dramatic gestures, as if orchestrating a public spectacle to shame me in front of the entire community. Officer Henderson fumbled with his clipboard, clearly overwhelmed by the chaos unfolding before him. I noticed that the ridiculousness of the situation was not lost on several neighbors peeking from behind potted plants and from doorways. Their expressions, a mix of apprehension and hidden amusement, testified that this was yet another episode in the ongoing saga of Karen's obsessive oversight. After what felt like an eternity of bureaucratic banter, Officer Henderson, clearly eager to move on, finally suggested that I exit the pool and present further identification. I did so with exaggerated care, shuffling toward the edge of the pool in a manner befitting a reluctant actor on a suburban stage. All the while, I couldn't help but wonder how far Karen was willing to push this absurd confrontation, and, more importantly, what her next move would be in her ongoing crusade against imposters. I stepped onto the pool deck, still maintaining my innuendo-laced charm, and prepared myself for what I sensed would soon become a long, entertaining battle between overzealous authority and a man simply trying to enjoy some peace on his pool float. The wheels of suburban absurdity were clearly in motion, and I was right at the center of this most unlikely of dramas. No sooner had the initial identity debacle been resolved than the situation escalated further. The perplexing spectacle on the pool deck drew a small crowd of residents, their murmurs mingling with the whispers of scandal. Karen, still resplendent in her sensible walking shoes and haughty glare, was relentless. As the onlookers gathered, she launched into another tirade that cut through the lazy afternoon air with unfailing precision. Determined not to allow her to usurp control of yet another trivial matter, I decided that a proper dialogue was overdue. I approached Karen with an air of calm formality that I hoped would neutralize the tension. "Karen," I began evenly, "I live here. I'm not here to mock our community's standards, I'm simply enjoying some well-deserved relaxation." My words, though measured, did little to soften her steeled demeanor. "Oh, relax," Karen snapped. "You think this so-called relaxation is worth upsetting the natural order of Golden Meadows? I've built these standards to protect our property values, our lifestyle, and our community's reputation. I won't have you disrespecting that." Her voice had a rising cadence, teetering on the brink of hysteria, as she waved her arms dramatically toward the pool, as if dispersing an unsightly mist. The very mention of property values struck a chord with many neighbors, and soon an impromptu debate ensued among those present. Some nodded sagely at Karen's accusations, while others exchanged incredulous looks. I noted that Karen's fervor was not solely rooted in a desire for order, it was fueled by a deeply personal need to assert her dominance over every inch of Golden Meadows. In an attempt to defuse the situation, I pointed out a rather trivial past infraction. "Remember the debate over the proper disposal of yard waste last month?" I remarked casually. "We discussed it at the community meeting, didn't we?" For a brief moment, Karen's expression wavered, as if that memory might offer a bridge to calm discussion. But any hope of amicability evaporated as quickly as it arose. Karen's eyes narrowed and she retorted, "That's beside the point. I'm not here to debate trivialities, I'm here to uphold the standards we all agreed upon." Officer Henderson, who had been shuffling awkwardly in the background after our earlier encounter, returned at this juncture. His presence, still tinged with uncertainty, was meant to lend an air of authority to the proceedings. "Sir, ma'am," he interjected haltingly, "perhaps we can resolve this matter by reviewing the community guidelines." His voice trailed off as Karen cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Guidelines? What good are guidelines when I'm the one who enforces them?" she snapped, her tone verging on the theatrical. The assembled residents now watched with rapt attention as the confrontation took on a life of its own. I could sense that the balance of power had tilted dangerously close to chaos. My own patience, however, remained intact. "Karen, I assure you," I said with practiced calm, "I'm a resident, my information should be verifiable, and I'm more than willing to cooperate. There's no need for such drastic measures." Yet Karen's response was imbued with the certainty of a self-appointed guardian. "I will not allow any disrespect here, not under my watch," she declared, her voice resonating like a clarion call to order. Officer Henderson, meanwhile, struggled to mediate as the conversation grew increasingly acrimonious. He shuffled through his clipboard, desperately searching for a procedural solution. The more he hesitated, the more Karen's tirade intensified. In that heated moment, it seemed as if all the pent-up frustrations of Golden Meadows might soon burst forth. Finally, as the murmuring crowd grew restless and the clock ticked toward an inevitable impasse, I suggested a break in proceedings. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to cool down," I offered, hoping to steer the discourse away from personal invective and toward a factual review of community policies. For a fleeting second, the tension appeared to ease. Karen's eyes softened ever so slightly, and Officer Henderson exhaled deeply, glancing around at the expectant faces of our neighbors. But as the moment passed, I realized that resolving this dispute would require more than just calm words, it would demand a comprehensive reassertion of my rights as a resident, coupled with undeniable evidence that my presence here was legitimate. I resolved then that I would document every word, every memoir of this confrontation, for the day when I would have no choice but to challenge these unreasonable standards. Thus, as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting Golden Meadows in hues of amber and gold, I retreated to a quiet corner, silently planning my next move. The official intervention had been a temporary reprieve, a brief pause in Karen's relentless campaign, but the battle for respect in our community was far from over. I would fight for my right to enjoy my own home, even if it meant enduring another bout of suburban absurdity. In the wake of our public confrontation, the personal indignity I suffered at the hands of Karen drove me to take systematic action. That evening, in the quiet of my modest residence at 42, Pelican Place, I retrieved a battered notebook and a small digital camera, tools far less glamorous than my covert gadgets but essential for this domestic campaign. I began compiling every incident, every accusatory memo that had been left at my door, every overheard comment that spat disdain at my presence. I scribbled details of Karen's theatrics on the pool deck and documented the dubious actions of Officer Henderson, whose confused attempts at maintaining authority had become emblematic of the HOA's flawed control over Golden Meadows. Each line of handwritten note and every snapshot taken served as tangible proof against a regime built on personal bias. I reviewed the community guidelines, poring over the HOA handbook. There, in bold, meticulously printed text, was the clause asserting every resident's right to reasonable enjoyment of their property free from undue harassment or discrimination. That clause, I realized, was my shield, and, potentially, the spear with which I would challenge Karen's tyrannical rule. The next morning, with my dossier assembled and my resolve hardened, I set out to speak privately with several sympathetic neighbors. Over cups of lukewarm coffee in the community's small cafe, I recounted the events of that fateful Tuesday. Mrs. Abbott, a soft-spoken retiree who had once confided her own grievances about petty neighborhood disputes, nodded in understanding. Mr. Daniels, a young professional who had grown tired of the rigid protocols imposed by the HOA, murmured his support in subdued tones. Though not everyone was willing to speak up, some were too scared of drawing Karen's ire. The seeds of dissent were clearly sown among the residents. Back at home, I scanned the evidence on my computer. Photographs of handwritten memos, clear as day against the backdrop of my door, were arranged chronologically. I carefully annotated each item with dates and times, noting even the smallest nuances, the tone of a note, the posture of a neighbor when passing by. Through this meticulous process, I began to see a pattern, a systemic campaign of harassment perpetrated under the guise of community preservation. Every piece of evidence reaffirmed one inescapable truth: Karen's relentless enforcement of HOA rules was less about genuine concern for our neighborhood and more about her own insecurities and obsessive need for control. What should have been a place for relaxation and family togetherness had become a battleground where Karen wielded her authority like a weapon. Late that afternoon, I visited the Golden Meadows Community Center to speak with a few members of the HOA board. With my dossier clutched in hand, I explained how the accumulated evidence clearly illustrated a violation of our community guidelines. Though the board members listened with varying degrees of skepticism and compassion, I could see the seeds of doubt about Karen's methods taking root among them. One board member, a pragmatic man with weary eyes, whispered that he had noticed similar incidents occurring around the neighborhood for months, but had been too intimidated to speak up. Buoyed by the growing support, I left the meeting with a sense of quiet optimism, knowing that even if change did not come immediately, I had done all I could to shine a light on the absurdity and injustice that had seeped into Golden Meadows. That evening, as I sat on my back porch and reviewed my carefully catalogued evidence one final time, I resolved that my next move would be to formally submit a complaint to the HOA, citing every instance of harassment and every contradiction between Karen's behavior and the stated guidelines. Every moment of that day, from the fevered note-taking in the dim light to the hushed conversations with concerned neighbors, strengthened my conviction. I was not alone in this fight. I was determined to reclaim our community's spirit of inclusivity and respect, a community where every resident, myself included, could savor simple pleasures like a quiet afternoon on a pool float without fear of undue interference. As the twilight deepened over Golden Meadows, I closed my dossier with a sense of resolve. In that quiet, determined moment, I vowed that I would stand firm in the face of Karen's overzealous rule and ensure that our right to peaceful enjoyment was not merely a line in a handbook, but a living, breathing reality for every resident of our neighborhood. Emboldened by the undeniable evidence and the whispers of support from fellow residents, I began planning the next stage of my campaign to challenge Karen's despotic hold over Golden Meadows. I realized that mere documentation, while powerful, would not suffice on its own. Real change would require mobilizing the community, and for that, creative action was needed, a counteroffensive that was as subtly humorous as it was pointedly effective. Late one evening, as I reviewed the dossier on my computer and reread the scathing notes left at my door, an idea sparked in my mind: what if I could turn the tables on Karen by exposing her own absurdities? With a wry smile, I set to work drafting a revised version of the community newsletter. My version, titled "The Real Scoop at Golden Meadows," contained playful, yet scathing commentaries on everyday absurdities within our neighborhood. I slyly interwove articles such as, "Is your mailbox plotting a coup?" and "The Secret Life of Garden Gnomes, More Than Meets the Eye," all peppered with tongue-in-cheek advice on dealing with overzealous security and intrusive HOA mandates. I printed a handful of copies and discreetly left them in common areas, near the entrance to the community center, in the lobby of our apartment buildings, and even slipped one under a few doors. The newsletter, though clearly satirical, carried an undercurrent of truth that resonated with anyone who had ever felt oppressed by Karen's harsh oversight. In tandem with the newsletter, I turned to the online forum for Golden Meadows. A platform where residents, both courageous and cautious, shared their thoughts about the community. Under the moniker, Concerned Citizen 47, I began posting cryptic but humorous observations about the state of our neighborhood. I wrote posts questioning the true motives behind Karen's incessant reminders about pool etiquette, suggesting with a wink that perhaps the HOA should investigate unauthorized aquatic art installations and tactical modifications of lawn ornaments. My posts were met with a range of reactions. Some neighbors laughed heartily, while others simply nodded in agreement, relieved to see that someone else dared to challenge the rigid status quo. Not content with solely digital activism, I supplemented my campaign with tangible pranks designed to highlight the absurdity of Karen's obsession. I acquired several rubber chickens, colorful, squeaky, and utterly ridiculous, and discreetly arranged them in conspicuous yet playful locations around the community. One was hung from the branch of a tree near the pool, another draped over a mailbox, and, in a particularly memorable stunt, one found its way attached to the antenna of Karen's own car. When Karen eventually discovered these odd intrusions, her outraged exclamations were heard throughout the neighborhood. Though I never revealed my role, the resulting chaos served to undermine her authority in the eyes of many. Throughout this counteroffensive, I made sure to stay well within the bounds of civility. I never intended to escalate the conflict into outright vandalism or violence. Rather, my goal was to use humor to deflate the overblown seriousness of Karen's rule. Every playful prank and satirical article was an act of resistance against the arbitrary standards imposed by a self-appointed enforcer. The community, tired of living under a microscope of unreasonable expectations, began to see the benefits of our shared laughter and unity. That week, conversations in hallways and at community gatherings took on a new tone. Neighbors who had previously murmured under their breaths were now speaking openly about the need to restore genuine warmth and inclusivity to Golden Meadows. Many admitted that Karen's incessant battles had not only stifled creativity but also strained the very relationships that defined our small community. On one particularly clear evening, as I sat on my patio reviewing the latest responses to my online posts, I felt a growing sense of camaraderie among the residents. The counteroffensive had begun to foster a wave of light-hearted defiance that was contagious. This was not merely about proving a point, it was about reclaiming our space, our voices, and ultimately, our right to simply enjoy life without fear of petty persecution. As the stars emerged over Golden Meadows that night, I felt a profound sense of resolve. My mission was clear. Challenge the oppressive absurdities imposed by Karen, mobilize our community's collective spirit, and transform our neighborhood from one of bureaucratic rigidity into a vibrant, living space where laughter and freedom reigned. The battle had entered a new phase, a whimsical, yet determined, stand against authoritarian eccentricity. Part 7, The Showdown at the Gazebo, approximately 700 words. Early the next morning, as dawn stretched its gentle light over Golden Meadows, a handwritten note was discreetly taped to my front door. The note, scrawled in a hand I immediately recognized as Karen's, read simply, "Meet me at the gazebo at noon." No police. No chickens. A mischievous smile tugged at my lips. I knew full well that Karen's fury, which had been simmering all week from her previous outbursts and our counteroffensive antics, was reaching a tipping point. And so, with measured anticipation and a hint of playful intrigue, I decided to accept her challenge. At noon, I strolled casually down the manicured path leading to the community gazebo, humming a jaunty tune as I went. My usual sunglasses now replaced by a pair of aviators to lend an air of nonchalance, I arrived to find Karen pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. Her sensible walking shoes pounded softly on the tile, and her disheveled hair betrayed a long, sleepless night of brooding. As our eyes met, the tension in the air was palpable, a head-on collision between suburban perfection and unapologetic defiance. "All right, Jones," Karen began in a clipped tone, her voice tremulous with barely restrained emotion. "Who are you really? What are you up to in our community?" The use of Jones felt like a final jab, a final attempt to strip away any shred of dignity I had amassed over the past weeks. I knew that the situation had to be handled with both candor and humor. Stepping forward, I adopted a somber yet playful tone. "Karen," I said, "the truth is, I'm not who you think I am. I'm an undercover pool inspector. I've been sent here to investigate what appears to be an alarming proliferation of questionable flotation devices in our community pool." I paused theatrically, letting the absurdity of the statement hang in the air. "Take a look around. Have you not seen inflatable unicorns with vacant stares, rubber ducks that defy hygiene, or even swans that seem to be plotting mysterious aquatic behaviors?" For a long, suspended moment, Karen's face underwent a complex transformation. Her eyes widened with disbelief, then shifted into an expression that mingled confusion with reluctant amusement. I could practically see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to process the improbable tale I had woven. "Pool inspector," she echoed incredulously. "Are you serious, Jones? Pools are for swimming, not for your ridiculous espionage." I shrugged with a dry smile. "Karen, sometimes the most absurd conspiracies hide in plain sight. I'm simply here to ensure that our community pool remains a safe haven, and to verify that no one is using it as a front for questionable activities," I added, deliberately vague yet playful enough to spark laughter. To my astonishment, Karen's stern facade began to crumble. A burst of unexpected laughter erupted from her, not the refined chuckle of a defeated bureaucrat but a full-blown, hysterical cackle that echoed around the gazebo. "You're crazy," she gasped between giggles, wiping tears from her eyes. "You're absolutely, certifiably insane." I grinned in response, maintaining the playful pretense. "Perhaps, Karen, but maybe I'm the only one who sees the truth in all this suburban madness," I said with a wink. After a long, charged exchange of barbs and revelations, the tone gradually shifted from combative to conciliatory. Karen, still chuckling intermittently, finally extended an olive branch. "All right, Jones, you win," she declared, her voice softening. "I promise to ease up on the constant pool trespassing accusations, if you promise to eliminate those ridiculous rubber chickens from my property." I nodded in faux solemnity, and we shook hands, an agreement that, in its absurdity, symbolized the beginning of a tentative truce. For a moment, the standoff dissolved into mutual amusement as both of us recognized the ludicrousness of our dispute. The gazebo, with its simple benches and climbing vines, became the stage for suburban reconciliation, a place where even the most entrenched differences could be bridged by humor and a shared desire for peace. As I left the gazebo that day, I couldn't help but think that this showdown was a turning point. In the ongoing battle between unyielding bureaucracy and genuine, light-hearted defiance, sometimes the best victory was simply to make your adversary laugh. The absurdity had reached its zenith, and in that absurdity, perhaps there was hope for a more relaxed Golden Meadows. Part 8. Aftermath and a temporary calm, approximately 500 words, following the bizarre showdown at the gazebo, Golden Meadows began to settle into a tentative calm. The explosive exchange between Karen and me had reverberated throughout the neighborhood, but as the dust settled, the atmosphere grew noticeably lighter. In the days that followed, residents commented that the tension had eased, perhaps the absurdity of our confrontation had defanged the tyranny that had so long plagued our community. Without the constant barrage of memos and outbursts, I found moments once again to slip into my peaceful routine. I resumed my afternoon sojourns by the pool, now with a renewed sense of defiant humor. The rubber chickens had, as promised, vanished from view, and the revised HOA newsletter had replaced its previous scathing tone with more palatable, albeit still irreverent, community updates. Neighbors began to smile at the newsletters, finding in their quirky titles a wink at our collective struggle. Even Karen herself appeared to have softened somewhat. While her trademark vigilance remained, she no longer pursued every minor infraction with the same ferocity. In casual hallway conversations, I heard her laugh softly at references to the Great Pool Conspiracy, and though she never openly admitted it, her demeanor suggested that our encounter had altered the way she viewed the absurdity of our suburban life. The brief truce, however, was not without its undercurrents. Some residents continued to murmur about the proper limits of community oversight, while others expressed cautious hope that our collective actions might finally usher in an era of more balanced governance. For my part, I documented every positive shift in the atmosphere with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that even a small victory over despotic micromanagement was worth the effort. On a crisp afternoon, as I lounged once more upon my flamingo float in the still, chlorine-scented waters, I reflected on the events of the past weeks. The once oppressive tension had given way to a sense of mutual understanding, a shared recognition that living in a community meant sometimes embracing both order and, yes, a little chaos. I realized then that the battle was not entirely over, but for now, Golden Meadows had gained a reprieve, the relentless, pool trespassing debates had subsided, replaced by a more tolerant, if still quirky, neighborly spirit. That evening, I received a short note slipped under my door, a simple message that read, "Thank you for making us all laugh. A concerned resident." It was a small gesture, but it resonated deeply with me. In that moment, I understood that our struggle for dignity and fun wasn't just my own, it belonged to everyone in Golden Meadows who longed for a community where individuality could flourish alongside order. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the pool area grew quiet once again, I allowed myself a contented sigh. The absurdities of the past weeks would certainly not vanish overnight, but the fragile peace and the shared laughter that had emerged were a promising sign. The battle for a balanced, light-hearted community was ongoing, but for now, in those shimmering twilight moments, life at Golden Meadows felt a little bit freer, a little bit brighter. Part 9, Community Reflections, approximately 500 words. In the weeks following our eventful gazebo encounter, the mood throughout Golden Meadows shifted perceptibly. Conversations that once skirted around topics of petty rule enforcement now openly addressed the need for change. At community meetings, residents, once intimidated into silence, began to share their own small rebellions and moments of quiet defiance against unreasonable standards. I found that many expressed gratitude for the laughter and levity that had emerged in the wake of Karen's long reign of hypervigilance. At our local cafe and even in the quiet corridors of our apartment buildings, hushed discussions turned into animated discussions. Neighbors recounted, with a mixture of amusement and relief, the days when every minor infraction was met with disproportionate outrage. The shared experience of our absurd confrontation had sparked a reflective mood, a collective realization that life in Golden Meadows could be both structured and spontaneous. I continued to maintain my regular schedule, floating lazily on my flamingo float during the midday hours, albeit with an ever-watchful eye on the subtle shifts among my fellow residents. I noticed that the HOA newsletter, now returning to a more temperate tone, seemed to reflect the newfound balance. There were still reminders about property maintenance and community standards, but sprinkled throughout were hints of humor and human understanding. One afternoon, as I meandered through the community park, I encountered a small group of neighbors gathered under a large oak tree. They were discussing the recent changes in a tone that was more reflective than confrontational. An elderly gentleman remarked, "I never thought I'd see the day when we'd all be laughing together instead of trembling over every little note on the door." His comment was met with nods and quiet chuckles, a testament to the slowly healing wounds inflicted by years of arbitrary rule enforcement. That evening, while reviewing emails on my computer at home, I received messages from several residents offering words of encouragement. Some recounted their own experiences of feeling oppressed, while others proposed ideas for future community events. Block parties, informal town halls, and even a casual, bring your pet to the park, day. The collective sentiment was unmistakable, Golden Meadows was ready for change. As I reflected on these community developments, I felt a profound sense of solidarity. Our shared experiences, not only my own brush with Karen's absurdity, had ignited a subtle revolution, one powered by laughter and a collective desire for normalcy. I realized that while no one particular victory could erase the past, each small step toward a more compassionate environment was a triumph in its own right. In the quiet aftermath of our turbulent days, life at Golden Meadows had begun to breathe again. The spectral tension that once darkened every interaction was dissipating, replaced by cautious optimism and a genuine commitment to community well-being. The moments of levity, the humorous anecdotes, and the shared memories all served as gentle reminders that even in the face of absurdity, we could choose to live and laugh together. As night fell over the tranquil streets and the pool area lay silently under a blanket of stars, I felt deeply grateful for the resilience of this community. We were, in our own eccentric way, crafting a new narrative for Golden Meadows, one defined not by arbitrary rules or oppressive control, but by unity, humor, and the enduring right to enjoy life on our own terms. Several weeks later, as the final notes of a gentle summer evening lingered over Golden Meadows, a surprising twist marked the culmination of our collective struggle. Amid whispers of gradual reform and measured relaxation in community regulations, I found myself unexpectedly summoned to a quiet, formal gathering organized by the HOA board. It was then that the long-standing tensions finally reached a resolution, and the wheels of change began to turn visibly. At the meeting, a representative of the board recounted the evidence and testimonies collected over the past tumultuous weeks, proof that had unearthed the needless rigidity imposed by Karen. To the astonishment of many, it was announced that significant disciplinary measures would be taken against the errant enforcer. In a move that symbolized a break from the past, Karen was relieved of the strict policing of minor community matters. The decision was met with a subdued murmur of approval from residents, many of whom had silently longed for reform. The board offered a few final words on the importance of maintaining community order while embracing the individuality of each resident. They noted that while rules were essential for harmony, they must never stifle creativity or the natural joy of neighborhood living. That evening, as the meeting adjourned quietly, I felt both vindicated and hopeful, a belief that change, though gradual, was indeed possible. Later that evening, I returned to my home at 42, Pelican Place, my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. In the quiet solitude of my living room, I looked out at the softly lit streets of Golden Meadows and felt certain that we had turned a corner. The relentless tirades and bureaucratic absurdities that had once defined our days were giving way to mutual respect and friendly banter. I even received a small package from the HOA, a token of the board's new approach. Inside was a miniature flamingo pool floaty, a playful nod to the past conflicts and an invitation to look forward with humor and optimism. I smiled as I placed it on my shelf, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest gestures can herald the biggest changes. That night, as I sat back on my patio and watched the stars emerge one by one, I reflected on the journey that had transformed our neighborhood. What began as a series of petty accusations had blossomed into a collective stand for the right to live freely and joyfully. Golden Meadows was slowly reawakening to the spirit of community, a place where residents could celebrate individuality while cherishing the bonds that held us all together. With a deep sense of gratitude, I realized that the struggle against unreasonable control was not merely my own, it was shared by every soul in our little corner of the world. Now, as our community took its first tentative steps toward a brighter, more inclusive future, I knew that the best was yet to come. Standing beneath the gentle glow of a street lamp, I whispered a quiet promise to myself and to Golden Meadows, that we would continue to protect our right to simple, unencumbered happiness, even in the face of bureaucratic absurdity. And in that promise lay the hope of a new beginning, one of humor, warmth, and the enduring spirit of togetherness.